Good day, friends. It's great to see you again. My name is Justin Waterfield, and I work at the Long McQuade store here in Toronto. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to use an amp sim. About a year ago, we made an amp sim shootout video, and we compared different features on a number of different amp sims from different manufacturers. The idea was to give you an overview of what features were available on what products so you could make a more informed decision about which one to purchase. And the number one comment that we got on that video was, great, I already have an amp sim or I bought one, but how do I actually use this thing? And that's exactly what we're going to explore today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use an amp sim in a whole bunch of different applications. This will give you the confidence that you need to use your amp sim to create and perform your music, and hopefully inspire you to use your amp sim in a way that you didn't think was possible. Before we dive in, let's look at the gear we're going to be using. For the guitar, I've brought my Gibson Les Paul, which is a 1958 reissue from the custom shop. If you've watched any of my other videos, this is the same guitar I always have with me. It is tuned to E-flat standard with heavy gauge strings, and it has low output PAF style pickups. For the amp sim, we're going to use one of the most popular units that we sell, which is the Lion from Universal Audio. This is what's referred to as a pedal style unit, which means it's designed to sit on the floor or on your pedal board, just like any other effects pedal. It has knobs and switches for you to control the various parameters of the amplifier, and a couple of foot switches to toggle the bypass function and to switch sounds. We actually did a dedicated video on this thing too, and you can check that out by following the link in the description somewhere. Now, it's super important for you to understand that you can use absolutely any amp sim to achieve what I'm going to show you today. It doesn't have to be the UA Lion or any other UA pedal for that matter. Everything I'm going to show you will apply to any amp sim, like the Line 6 Helix, the IK Tonex, the Neural Quad Cortex, the Fender Tone Master Pro, the Tech 21 Sans amp, or absolutely any of the other awesome products on the market. Okay, you ready? Let's jump in. The first scenario that we're going to look at is using an amp sim with headphones. Many players today, especially new players, are looking for a way to practice silently, or at least close to silence, so they don't disturb others around them. Sometimes you just can't make noise. Some folks like to practice at night when everybody's asleep, or maybe that's the only time you're able to practice. Sometimes you have sensitive neighbors and really thin walls, or both. And sometimes people are just shy and they don't want everybody around them hearing them practice the same chords and scales over and over again. Whatever the scenario, amp sims are great for this because the vast majority of them natively have a dedicated headphone output. In our case today with the Lion, this does not have a dedicated headphone out. So let's take a look how we connect this up. So the first thing that we're going to need is one of these cables. This is a dual TS. This is a Y cable essentially. So it has dual TS, 1/4 inch connectors on one end, and then a female TRS connector on the other end. And what we're going to do is, the Lion has a left and a right output, so it is a stereo pedal, and you're going to connect one of these each into its own output, and then you're going to connect the headphones into the female end and adjust the volume on the pedal itself. And that's really all there is to it. So we've already got it hooked up here with the left and right out, going to my set of headphones. And here's what that sounds like. So to you guys watching this, you're not hearing anything except the zing of the strings, but all the sound of the Lion is going directly into my ears through the headphones, and that's really the point. It's not going to be completely silent, but it's not going to be a blaring speaker in a room that's going to be disturbing everybody else, and that's the point. Now, one last thing to mention here, using Bluetooth headphones is just not an option with this setup. I get asked about this all the time. Somebody will inquire how to connect their AirPods or whatever to their amp sim, and the reality is you just can't do that. The simplest way I can explain this is that Bluetooth data stream just isn't fast enough to handle real-time audio. So in other words, there would be too much of a delay between hitting the note and hearing the sound through the wireless headphones. So for this setup, you have to use a set of wired headphones. That's just how it is. In the next scenario, we're going to look at putting an amp sim through a guitar amplifier. There's a couple of ways to do this, so let's start by using the amp sim into the input of a guitar amp. Now I can hear some of you screaming at me, why on earth would you put an amp sim into a guitar amp? Isn't an amp sim supposed to replace an amp? And the answer is yes. Yes, it is. That's the intention. But sometimes we might not have the means to just go and buy new equipment. Sometimes we got to work with what we have, and that's totally fine. So let's take a look at this amp here, which is the Fender Frontman 10. This is what will come in those like Strat packs or like guitar kits with the guitar and the bag and the amplifier and stuff like that. This is typically the design and size of amplifier that you're going to find in those kits. And it sounds like this. Perfectly fine, perfectly serviceable, not a ton of personality, and that's fine. It is what it is. It serves its purpose. Let's hear the distortion sound. Let's face it, leaves a lot to be desired, but again, that's okay. It is what it is. These amps are designed to a price point, and to that extent, they don't have a whole lot of inherent personality to them. And that's what makes them actually a pretty decent platform for putting pedals into to make them sound a little bit more lively and whatnot. So let's flip back to the clean channel here and activate the Lion and see what we get. Totally different, right? Like this is the stock sound. And this is with the Lion going into the front end. Totally serviceable. You could absolutely practice with that sound. It sounds a million times better than the sort of anemic, vanilla, clean channel sound. And I should note that you can still tailor the sound on the amp as well. So you got the knobs and the EQ and, you know, the speaker simulation, whatever, on your amp sim. And then if you really want to fine tune it, you still got the controls on the amp because you're just going to the front end input. So let's try a different scenario. I'm going to flip this to the overdrive setting, the sort of swarm of bees sound, as we affectionately call it. And then I'm going to engage the Lion, and then we're going to tweak it and see if we can get it sounding halfway decent. So here is the stock overdrive sound. And with a Lion added, It has its purposes. It's still a little rough and around the edges and maybe a little too sizzly for most, but the point is that we got a much more usable sound out of it. The knobs are going to be pointing in weird directions that you wouldn't otherwise point them in, but that's fine. Do whatever works. It's totally doable to have this kind of setup. Make do with what you have. Now, there's also another way to get the amp sim into this amplifier, and that's to use the aux input. Most entry-level practice amps, like this Frontman, have some sort of additional input for like an external source, like a music player or your phone or whatever. If you've got an older amp, it might be quaintly labeled as MP3 input or something to that effect. This essentially functions as an insert point where you bypass the preamp and you go directly into the power amp and into the speaker itself, and it makes it louder. So let's explore how to connect this up. I'm going to leave the output of the guitar into the input of the line. That's going to stay the same. I'm going to unplug the input of the amp because we no longer need it. We're not going in through there. We're going in through here now. Let's free up the outputs on the Lion. And then we take our aux cable here, or a Y cable, whatever you want to call it. There we go. And then we take the little 1/8 inch TRS, and that goes into the aux input there. And let's hear what that sounds like now. Way different, totally head and shoulders above what we were getting before. And the reason for this is that we're totally bypassing the overdrive and the EQ and the gain structure and the preamp of the Frontman. We're just not even addressing that. We're not even touching it. We're going straight into the power amp, which is connected to the speaker. This is essentially now a powered speaker, albeit a really tiny little one. So look, check this out. So these knobs on the amp don't even work. All the control now is on the amp sim itself. So the gain, the EQ, even the output, it's all from here. Let's hear a little bit more of this. On that same thread, let's look at connecting your amp sim to a bigger, more professional amplifier. This next setup is what I would consider the ideal way to use an amp sim with an existing guitar amp. We're going to be utilizing a feature called an effects loop. Now, not every amplifier has an effects loop, in which case you'll have to use one of the methods I just showed you, probably just going into the front of the amp. An amp with an effects loop should have it labeled as such. It might say something like send and return, or preamp out and power amp in, or something to that effect. If in doubt, consult the manual for your particular amplifier. An effects loop allows you to patch effects between the preamp and power amp sections of your amplifier. And it also allows you to patch effects or amp sims directly into the power amp itself, almost exactly the same as we just did with the line input on the Frontman. Let me show you what I mean. So right here, we've got a nice tube amp from Trainer. This is a YCV 20. It's EL84 powered. It's about 20 watts, got a Celestion greenback in it. I've set it up nice and neutral. All the knobs are pointing at noon, the gain, the treble, bass, middle. Volume's on about 9 o'clock. You could probably talk loudly over it. And this is what it sounds like. So nice full-bodied tone, sounds nice and warm in the bottom end, a little bit of a scoop in the mids, nice chimey treble, sounds totally fine. But now let's switch it up and get some Marshall sound going into this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Lion, and then the Lion is going to go into the effects return. And let's hear what that sounds like. So I've got the guitar going into the input of the Lion, and then we've got the output of the Lion coming all the way back here. And I'm going to reach around and do effects return right there. Now, basically, we have bypassed the preamp. These knobs will no longer work, and this is the sound. Way more personality. This has got the Marshall flavor injected right in. Many players use their modelers this way because it gives you the flexibility of having, in this example, the sound of a giant Marshall plexi in a small combo amp like this one. The power amp and the speaker are just there to carry the sound into the room, and they're also contributing to the feel of the amp sim. There really is no substitute for pushing actual air with an actual speaker, and the resulting tone feels very different versus being in your own world with a set of headphones. Now, one last thing I should mention before we change gears here. The eagle-eyed among you might have noticed that I turned the cabinet and speaker emulation off before I went through the power amp of this little YCV. And the reason is we got a speaker full of flavor right here. We have a Celestion greenback on board. And if I emulate other Celestions or JBLs or whatever it is on the Lion going into this, it's just going to come out super nasally and super like nasty sounding. Most amp sims, if not all amp sims, if I'm not mistaken, have a way to override and to bypass the speaker emulation. And that's because amp sims are designed to play nicely with existing amplifiers, that you can have this be your preamp and still utilize, onboard speakers or speaker cabinets or whatever else you got with some sort of power amp. And that gives them that flexibility to use in all these different situations. I'm sure that if you've done any research on amp sims, you've likely come across something called an FRFR cab. The name stands for Full Range Flat Response Cabinet. Essentially, this is a power amp and a speaker in a cabinet which you connect your amp sim into. It differs from a regular guitar amplifier because it's intended to have a fuller frequency range and a neutral tone. FR cabs are built to be tough and durable like regular guitar amplifiers, which you're going to need if you want to play live. This, I think, is the desired setup for any amp sim because it really lets the sound of the amp sim shine through without any extra coloration from other components. So today I've got the Fender ToneMaster FR12 here, but there's plenty more on the market, including ones from Blackstar, EVH, Line 6, IK Multimedia. They got their ToneX cab. There's tons of them out there. So basically, I just have the Lion going out into the single input on the back of the FR12, and this is what it sounds like. that's a really, really dynamic, range of tones there. And I really didn't do anything, other than just adjusting my volume and adjusting the strength of my picking. I was really letting the Lion do all the heavy lifting. And that's absolutely something that you get from an FR cab. You really get the pure sound of the modeler. You're not fighting against an existing, tube power amp or an existing speaker. You're just getting the sound of the amp sim, and that's basically it. Since the FR cabinet is a flat response cabinet, it really has no inherent personality on its own. And this is the selling point. Now we get to use all the built-in speaker emulation on the Lion or whatever other amp sim you have. So let's see what a difference the speaker emulation makes. And I'm changing nothing else on the Lion here, just the speakers. So that right there, that's the selling point of the FR cab, is that we can use all of these speaker emulations or IRs or whatever you got going on your particular cab sim. You can change those up. You're not beholden to whatever speakers are already in the combo amp or speaker cabinet that you're using. Now, the other thing that I got to point out is that this is a powered speaker. There is a power amp already inside this speaker cab. An amp sim doesn't drive an existing speaker cabinet on its own. So if you have, like, for example, a Marshall 412, if you hook up an amp sim to it, it's not going to do anything. You're not going to hear anything. It needs a power amp to be able to move those speakers and move that air. An FR cab has that built in already. And speaking of built-in features, one more thing before we change gears again. You're going to notice that this FR cab has some controls along the top. It's got treble, middle, bass, and a cut control. Not every FR cabinet has extra controls on it, but basically what this allows you to do is change the tone of the cabinet in the room. So when I'm, playing loud like this for you guys, this amp is moving the air in the room and it sounds a certain way. And I thought it just had too much bass. So you notice that I got the bass control down to about 9 o'clock. And that really reined it in, the sort of woofiness to where I like it. FR cabs have a line out, which we've also been feeding into the camera, so you're hearing that as well. The line out from an FR cab doesn't include all this EQ. This is just for you. Think of an FR cab as like a personal monitor, like those, traditional fold back, stage monitors. This is just for you when you're performing live. The sound tech or the recording technician, if you're at a studio, is getting a direct feed from your modeler or from the direct out on the FR cab. And then the EQ is just to EQ it to your ears when you're playing in the room. That's what that's for. The other attractive use case for an amp sim is to forego an amp or speaker cabinet altogether. You can plug an amp sim directly into a PA system if you want. And in fact, this is a huge appeal, not just for you, the guitarist. It also helps out the sound technician who's working at the venue that you're playing at. They get a direct feed of the exact tone you want, and they don't have to worry about where the amps are placed on stage or getting the microphone placement just right or any of that kind of stuff. You'll have a quieter stage, which makes it easier for everybody to hear themselves. And let's face it, your ears are just going to thank you. So to do this, I'm basically just going to take the output from the FR cab right here. And oh look, I have a PA system in the corner here. How convenient. And basically I just go into the input there, and let's spin that back around and get back to the guitar. So guitar is going into the Lion is going into the PA, and here's how it sounds in the room. Of course, there's nothing stopping you from running your amp sim directly into the PA in addition to a real amp or an FR cabinet. Most amp sims should have multiple outputs, so you can split your signal to 2 different places. This will give you the flexibility to have a live speaker on stage, but still give the sound technician or sound engineer a direct feed from your amp sim for the cleanest possible signal. It really is the best of both worlds. The next thing we're going to look at is recording with an amp sim. Some people refer to this as recording direct, as you're not using the traditional method of placing microphones on a guitar amp. Instead, we'll connect our amp sim directly to the recording interface. So I have both the outputs from the Lion going into both the inputs on this UA Volt 276. Now I gotta say again, it doesn't matter what interface you're using, or it doesn't matter that you're not using the specific gear that we got going on here. This is just a placeholder for whatever you got. If you got a Focusrite interface, if you got a Motu interface, if you got whatever, it will work. Outputs of this into inputs of this, we got Pro Tools queued up here. I got a new track armed and ready to go. I'm not going to get into the particulars of how to set up a session. For that, you're going to want to check out Andre's video that was released just prior to this one. That'll tell you the whole sequence of events in terms of like recording. Right now, my producer Matt just queued up a track for me and has asked me to lay down a lead on it. So let's see how this goes. While I wait for Noel Gallagher to serve me a notice for copying his solo, hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of just how easy it is to record a great guitar tone into a session on your DAW. There's no fussing about with choosing the right microphone for the right speaker on the right amp in the right room. None of that. I basically just brought the Lion, hooked it up to this interface, and away I went. No muss, no fuss. The tone that you practice with, that you gig with, is the tone you record with. That's a huge appeal of using an amp sim to record. So what happens if I don't want to use a computer or start up a session in my DAW? What happens if I just want to hear the sound of the amp sim through the speakers? Well, you can do exactly what I just did. Shut off the computer and listen direct to the amp sim that you got. And you can do this pretty easily. Most interfaces have a direct monitoring function that lets you listen to the inputs, the sound that's coming into the interface. And this is usually on a button or a dial or whatever. So that's what I just did there. And it lets me listen to the Lion through these studio monitors, which are, for all intents and purposes, FR speakers. So you don't even need the computer to be able to practice. Maybe you're a home recording guy who doesn't have amps or whatever, or maybe you just couldn't be bothered and you just want to sit at your desk and noodle away. Well, you can absolutely do that with minimal fuss. So there we have it, folks. We started out with the intention of using our amp sim a few different ways, but I'm pretty sure we got way more than we bargained for. And this is precisely the appeal of having an amp sim, the flexibility. You can use them however you want and in whatever way suits your application. I've thrown a lot of info at you in this video, so if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today on this video. I really appreciate it. This video is part of Long McQuade's Learning Series, whereby we offer everybody free educational seminars and workshops throughout our stores and online. We do this to give back to the music community by educating people how to play their instruments, how to record and mix their music, or, in this case, how to use their gear. It's important to us, and to me personally, that we're not just selling you the products that you want, but also providing you with the knowledge and the insight to be able to express your creative vision by using those products. As always, the link to all the products we've shown here will be in the description, so be sure to check them out if you're curious. Please like and subscribe if you dig what we're doing here. It really helps out the channel. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Cheers.